I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin. Tanner Rhodes sat across from Kendra, his wife of 8 years, in the quiet, dimly lit restaurant. The soft clink of glasses and murmurs of other diners filled the air, but Tanner barely heard it. His eyes were locked on Kendra's face, trying to read her. There had been a distance between them for weeks, a coldness he couldn't explain. Tonight, he thought he could fix it. A quiet dinner, some time to talk, to reconnect. But when the door of the restaurant slammed open with a violent gust, the world around him shifted. Tanner's head snapped to the entrance. A man walked in, eyes wild with fury. Tanner's heartbeat quickened. The man was heading straight toward them, and there was something in his gaze, something familiar. Before Tanner could react, the stranger reached their table, fists clenched. He didn't acknowledge Tanner. His eyes only focused on Kendra. "You said you were done with him," the man shouted, his voice harsh and filled with accusation. "You told me tonight was our night, Kendra." The restaurant fell silent, all eyes turning toward the scene unfolding before them. Kendra froze. Her face drained of color, her lips parted in shock. Tanner's mind raced. Who was this man? Kendra looked up at him, her face pale. Tanner's eyes locked with hers. The guilt was written all over her face, the truth slowly dawning on him. The man, Colby Vance, her lover. His mind clicked into place. Tanner had known there was something wrong, but this was something he could never have prepared for. Kendra wasn't the woman he thought she was, and that man standing in front of him was the catalyst. Tanner's world was shattering before his eyes. Finally, Kendra spoke, but her words were hollow. "Tanner, I am sorry." Tanner stared at her, feeling his heart plummet. It was over. This wasn't about forgiveness. Not anymore. It was time for a different kind of reckoning. Hey, if you're still watching, that means you're enjoying the story. I have one small request. I'm trying to reach my first 1,000 subscribers. If you like stories like this, please hit the like button and subscribe to join the journey. It means a lot to me. And trust me, even better stories are coming. Tanner sat alone in his car, his hands gripping the wheel, the engine running, but his mind far away. The restaurant's parking lot was quiet, the night air cool against his skin. He could still hear Colby's voice echoing in his ears, demanding answers, calling him a fool. But more than that, Tanner could hear Kendra's voice too, the hollow apology, the silence that followed. His fingers flexed on the steering wheel as the revelation settled in. Kendra had been seeing Colby behind his back for 2 years. The woman he had trusted, loved, built his life with, had kept this secret from him. His marriage was a lie. Tanner leaned back, closing his eyes, trying to breathe through the storm inside him. He could feel the anger bubbling up inside him, but it was colder now, sharper. He wasn't going to lose control. Not yet. He needed to think. He needed a plan. His mind raced back to the small moments he had overlooked, the late nights, the secretive phone calls, the quiet distractions. It was all so obvious now. "I'm not stupid," Tanner muttered to himself, voice shaking with a mix of rage and disbelief. He wasn't going to let her get away with it. But how? The answer came to him quickly. It wasn't about confronting her right now. Not just yet. He needed leverage. He needed to see if Colby was truly the man he thought he was. And if Kendra was worth saving, or if he should let everything burn. He was done being the passive one. It was time for action. Tanner started the car and drove away into the night, the faint glow of streetlights casting long shadows on the road ahead. Tanner knew what he had to do. The betrayal wasn't just a wound to his heart. It was a challenge to his pride, his dignity. He wasn't going to let this go. Not now, not ever. His mind was set. Kendra had made her choice, and now he had to make his. He spent the next few days in a cold, methodical silence. He took time off work, but it wasn't for rest. No, this was different. This was a war, and Tanner wasn't about to let it be one-sided. He was going to prepare, get his facts, and make his move. He reached out to a private investigator, someone he had used once before for a real estate deal. He was smart, thorough, and most importantly, discreet. Tanner's instructions were simple. Follow Colby Vance. He needed to know everything. Every detail, every connection. Meanwhile, Tanner set up meetings with his lawyer. He knew that Kendra would try to make things right, but he wasn't ready to listen. Not yet. He had seen her for what she truly was, and he wasn't going to let her manipulate him into a weak position. The first few days were filled with cold calculation. Tanner's mind was no longer focused on healing. It was focused on revenge. The private investigator came back with the first report. Colby's business dealings were a mess. There were rumors, whispers of shady practices, and a history of broken promises. Tanner had what he needed. Colby's reputation would soon be destroyed. But it wasn't enough. Tanner needed more. He needed to dig deeper. He needed to be more than just a man scorned. He needed to be a force of nature. As Tanner sat in his office, the last bit of warmth from the morning sun drifting through the blinds, he looked at his phone and made the call. His lawyer would take care of the business side. An arrest? He would handle it himself. Tanner stood in his office, looking out the window at the city skyline as the sun began to dip below the horizon. The light cast long shadows, much like the ones now creeping into his life. He had made his move, a subtle one at first. Colby's world was beginning to crack. Tanner had planted the seed of doubt in Colby's business dealings, feeding information to a few trusted sources. It wasn't a direct attack, not yet, but it was enough to start. The private investigator had delivered his next round of findings. Colby's finances were shaky, riddled with bad investments and shady deals. Tanner was ready. He wasn't going to burn Colby all at once. That would be too easy. No, Tanner would make sure Colby's collapse was slow and painful, like the slow loss of a game he didn't even know he was playing. Tanner's phone buzzed. It was the lawyer. "Mr. Rhodes, we've finalized everything. The documents are ready. We can hit Colby where it hurts, legally. It's time." A cold smile formed on Tanner's lips. This was just the beginning. Kendra thought she had made her choice. But this was far from over. Tanner wasn't just a man scorned. He was a force now, and he was about to take control of everything. As he signed the legal papers, Tanner's mind drifted to Kendra. She was still unaware of the full extent of his plans. She still thought he was the heartbroken husband, but she would soon see how wrong she was. Tanner could barely keep the smirk off his face as he sat across from Kendra at their kitchen table. The day had been a blur of meetings, calls, and planning, but he had to take a moment for this. For her, Kendra had been reaching out to him more over the last few days, trying to piece together the remains of their shattered relationship. She knew something was off. She knew Tanner wasn't the same, but she had no idea just how deep the deception went. "Kendra," Tanner started softly, his voice calm, controlled. "I've been thinking. We've been through so much, and I think it's time we start talking. For real." Kendra looked up from her coffee, her face a mixture of worry and hope. She hadn't given up, not yet. "I'm sorry, Tanner," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't know how to fix this. I don't even know where to start." Tanner leaned forward, staring into her eyes. He could see the doubt, the guilt, and a flicker of fear. She knew the truth was coming, and she wasn't ready for it. "You don't have to fix anything, Kendra," Tanner said, his voice almost too smooth. "You've already made your choice, and that's what I'm working with. You made your choice, and now it's time for me to make mine." He stood up, slowly, and walked around the table to stand in front of her. Her eyes followed him, uncertain, but she still wasn't prepared for what he was about to do next. "I know about Colby," he said, his words slicing through the air like a knife. Kendra froze. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Tanner could see her world starting to crumble, the facade falling apart in real time. "I know everything, Kendra," he continued, his tone colder than before. "Every lie, every secret. You think I didn't notice? You think I didn't see how far you were slipping away from me?" Her face paled, her hand trembling as she reached for her coffee cup. But Tanner wasn't done. "Not yet. You lied to me," he said, each word deliberate and final. "You didn't just betray me. You betrayed everything we built together. And that's something I won't forgive." The days following Tanner's confrontation with Kendra were a blur. His emotions were numb. The sting of betrayal had dulled, replaced with cold, calculated anger. He knew what had to be done. Colby was still unaware of the storm that was brewing. He thought his life was intact, that he had won. But Tanner was playing a long game. It was time to get closer to Colby. Much closer. Tanner had always been good with people. He knew how to manipulate a situation, how to make someone believe they were in control when, in reality, they weren't. It was time to put that skill to use. He found his way into Colby's circle of friends, slowly and carefully. A few business events here, a casual drink there. Colby was charismatic, but Tanner could see through it. He saw the cracks in Colby's facade. The man wasn't as perfect as he tried to appear. Colby was vulnerable, and Tanner knew how to exploit that. One night, after several drinks, Tanner and Colby found themselves at a private club, the noise of the crowd mixing with the clinking of glasses. Tanner watched as Colby bragged about his so-called success, his charm and arrogance filling the room. Tanner could feel the disgust building in him. This man was a fraud, but he didn't know it yet. "So, Tanner," Colby said, leaning in, his voice low and conspiratorial. "I gotta say, I admire your patience with Kendra. Not everyone would put up with that kind of thing. But hey, you'll be glad to know I'm done with her. I'm moving on." Tanner forced a smile, pretending to be interested, but inside he was seething. This was the moment he had been waiting for. Colby was playing right into his hands. "I'm sure you are," Tanner replied coolly. "But you know, Colby, sometimes you have to wonder how many people are really in control of their own lives. Or are they just being played?" Colby raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "I'm not saying anything," Tanner added, taking a sip from his glass, "but maybe you should be more careful about who you trust." The hours spent in the dark corners of his mind left Tanner feeling hollow. The anger was still there, but now it had transformed. The rage had turned cold, and with it came something deeper, the need to understand why. Why did Kendra betray him? What was it about Colby that made him more appealing than everything they had built together? Kendra's apology from earlier kept playing in his mind. It wasn't enough, not even close. But it made him wonder, was there a chance for them? Could they fix this? Or had everything been ruined beyond repair? He picked up the phone and dialed Kendra's number. He had thought about leaving her 100 times, but now, sitting in the silence of his office, he wasn't so sure. The phone rang, and then her voice came through, soft, almost hesitant. "Tanner, are you okay?" His grip on the phone tightened. "Are you?" There was a long pause. "I don't know. I don't know what I was thinking. I never meant to hurt you." "Then why did you?" Tanner's voice was tight, the pain still raw in his chest. "Because I was scared. Because I thought I was losing myself," she whispered. Tanner's eyes closed. The vulnerability in her voice hit him like a physical blow. He had always known she was afraid of something, but hearing her admit it was different. It felt real, and it made him feel like he had been blind to what was really happening. "I'm not sure I can trust you again," Tanner admitted, his voice cracking slightly. "I understand," Kendra replied quietly. The silence stretched between them, but something shifted in that moment. A part of Tanner wanted to heal, to let go of the anger. But another part of him, the part that wanted revenge, knew this was just the beginning. Tanner stared at the document in front of him. The words blurred together as he read over the information again. Colby's history, his lies, his shady dealings, it all made sense now. Colby wasn't just a man having an affair with his wife. He was a man with a dark, dangerous past that could ruin everything. Tanner ran his hand over his face, feeling the weight of the situation. He had done his research, gathered all the ammunition, but now doubts began to creep in. Was this worth it? Was revenge really what he needed? Or was he just blinded by his own pain? He had every reason to bring Colby down, to destroy everything the man had built. But would that make him feel better? Would he feel whole again? A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was his lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who had always been a step ahead. She handed him a folder. "I've got what you need, Tanner," she said, her tone businesslike. "Colby's reputation is already starting to crack. The press is picking up on some of the rumors. If you want to go public, now is the time." Tanner looked at the file, his mind racing. The path was clear. Colby was vulnerable, and if Tanner struck now, he could destroy the man's career in a matter of days. But a part of him hesitated. The doubt, the nagging feeling that this was all just an empty victory, lingered in his mind. "Are you sure about this?" Tanner asked, staring at the folder. His lawyer didn't hesitate. "This is your move. You control the narrative. It's time to finish what you started. Tanner closed the folder, his thoughts still conflicted. He wasn't sure what he wanted anymore. But he knew one thing for sure. Colby would never see this coming. The day Tanner had been waiting for had arrived. He sat at his desk, the report from his lawyer in front of him, the evidence against Colby in hand. It was time to make the call. Time to end Colby's career, to bring everything crashing down. He was about to dial Colby's number when his phone buzzed. It was a message from Kendra. "I'm sorry. I never meant for things to go this far." Tanner stared at the screen, the words burning into his mind. He had everything he needed to destroy Colby. But now, he was faced with a choice. Should he continue down this path of destruction, or should he consider Kendra's apology? The tension in the room was suffocating. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city below. He had been betrayed. But was revenge really the answer? Tanner's thoughts were interrupted by another message, this time from a familiar number. It was from Colby. "You think you've won, Rhodes? You're not even close." The words sent a chill down Tanner's spine. Colby wasn't backing down. And now it was personal. Tanner clenched his fists. The stage was set for a final showdown. But before he made his move, he had to know something. He looked into the camera, breaking the fourth wall, as if speaking directly to the audience. "Where are you watching from? What city are you in? Let me know in the comments. I want to know who's with me in this. Who else has felt betrayed like this?" Tanner's voice was low, his eyes intense, drawing the audience in. "Let's see how far you're willing to go to stand up for what's right." Tanner paced back and forth in his office, the weight of the decision pressing on him. The evidence was undeniable. Colby's world was about to come crashing down. Tanner had all the information, the shady deals, the broken promises, and the betrayals. His plan was almost complete, and yet something still gnawed at him. Should he release the information now? Should he let the world see Colby for what he truly was? The moment of truth had come, and Tanner couldn't help but feel a strange sense of satisfaction. Colby had taken everything from him, his trust, his marriage, his peace of mind. Tanner wanted to watch Colby fall. But was it enough? He sat down at his desk and opened the folder once more. His lawyer's words echoed in his mind. "This is your moment. Take it." The decision had to be swift. The press was waiting, the story ready to go public. Tanner picked up the phone and dialed his lawyer. Colby's heart raced as he realized the magnitude of the situation. His empire was collapsing. His reputation, everything he had built, was falling apart faster than he could react. Tanner had played him perfectly, and now Colby had nothing. His face was pale as he stared at the screen, the messages piling up, text alerts, calls, and emails. The media had already picked up on the story, and the damage was done. Colby slammed the phone down, pacing the room in frantic desperation. He had always been able to talk his way out of situations before, but this was different. Tanner had outsmarted him at every turn. "What am I going to do?" Colby muttered to himself, his mind spinning. He couldn't go public with this. He couldn't afford the fallout. There was only one thing left to do: reach out to Kendra. She was the only one who could help him now. She had to know what was happening, and maybe, just maybe, she could fix this. But deep down, Colby knew it was too late. The walls were closing in, and there was no escaping the consequences of his actions. Kendra stood in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection. She had spent the past few days trying to make sense of everything: the betrayal, the lies, the affair. The man she had once trusted had broken her, and now she was facing the consequences. But it wasn't just Colby's lies she had to face. It was her own choices. She had betrayed Tanner, the man who had stood by her through everything. And now, she was watching her life fall apart. The calls were coming in, friends, family, even Colby, who was trying desperately to salvage something. But Kendra didn't know where to turn. She didn't know if she even wanted to fix this. Her phone buzzed on the counter, interrupting her thoughts. It was Tanner. She took a deep breath before answering. "Tanner," she said softly. "Where are you?" he asked, his voice cold. There was no warmth left in it. "I'm at the house." "Tanner, I'm sorry. I don't want your apologies anymore." "Kendra." Tanner's voice cut through the phone. "You made your choice. And now, so have I." Kendra's heart sank. She had always feared this day would come, but she wasn't ready. She wasn't prepared for the reality of losing everything: her marriage, her family, her future. Tanner's voice came through again, firm and unyielding. "You'll have to figure this out on your own. I'm done." The phone went dead in her hand. Kendra sank to the floor, her mind a storm of guilt, regret, and confusion. Tanner was gone, and now she was left with nothing but the broken pieces of her own choices. Tanner sat in his darkened office, staring at the phone in his hand. It had been a few days since the expose on Colby had gone public. The media was running wild with the story, and Tanner's revenge was finally coming to fruition. Colby's career was in freefall. His connections were severed, and every dirty secret Tanner had uncovered was now a matter of public record. But something fell off. As satisfying as it was to watch Colby squirm, Tanner couldn't help but feel an emptiness. He had orchestrated this downfall so meticulously, but now that it was happening, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt hollow. The ringing phone pulled him from his thoughts. It was his lawyer again. "Mr. Rhodes, Colby's lawyer has reached out. He's offering a settlement. He wants to meet." Tanner scoffed. What does he think he can offer now? It's over for him. I thought the same, but they're suggesting a face-to-face. They might have information that could change things. Tanner's mind raced. This wasn't the first time someone had tried to negotiate with him, but there was something about this that felt different. Colby had lost everything, but perhaps there was something he still had to offer. "Set up the meeting," Tanner said, his voice calm and controlled. "I'll handle this personally." He hung up the phone, feeling the weight of the moment. This was his chance to gain full control of the situation. Colby might be broken, but there was still power in this game, and Tanner was going to use it to his advantage. Kendra's hands trembled as she picked up the phone once more. She had tried to reach Tanner, but he wouldn't pick up. After everything that had happened, after the fallout from Colby's exposure, she wasn't sure what to expect. She had spent days contemplating everything, and yet here she was, unable to move forward. She stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the emptiness around her. The house, once filled with warmth and memories, now felt like a cold, distant shell. It was her fault. She had been selfish, and now she had no one left to blame but herself. The doorbell rang, pulling her from her thoughts. She opened the door to find a courier with a large envelope in hand. "For you," the courier said, his tone neutral. Kendra hesitated before accepting the envelope. It was from Colby's lawyer. She had no idea what it could be, but a sense of dread washed over her. She opened the envelope, pulling out the papers inside. It was a settlement offer. Colby was willing to give up everything he had just to get out of this mess. But the final clause was the most shocking. He was willing to offer Tanner a substantial sum to drop the charges and end the public battle. Kendra stared at the document, her heart racing. Was this the end? Would this be the solution that could stop everything from falling apart? Or was this just another lie, another way for Colby to manipulate the situation? Her hands shook as she placed the papers on the table. She couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Fear gripped her chest. No matter what she did, she couldn't escape the consequences of her choices. The meeting was set. Tanner arrived at the upscale downtown office, the towering building a symbol of the power he now held. He didn't need to be here. He knew everything he needed to know about Colby's collapse. But this was more than business. This was personal. Tanner entered the sleek conference room, where Colby and his lawyer were already seated. Colby looked different, disheveled, his usual confidence replaced by a nervous edge. The man who once strutted around with arrogance was now a broken version of himself. Tanner took a seat at the opposite end of the table, his expression cold and unreadable. The lawyer cleared his throat and slid a document across the table. "This is our final offer," Colby's lawyer began, his tone measured. "If Mr. Rhodes agrees to a settlement, Colby will relinquish all assets, cut ties with any business ventures related to the affair, and agree to stay out of the public eye indefinitely." Tanner looked at the document, but didn't touch it. His eyes were fixed on Colby, who was staring down at his hands. "Is that all you've got?" Tanner asked, his voice low and dangerous. "You think I'm here for money? You think I'm going to take a settlement and walk away from everything?" Colby's head snapped up, his eyes pleading. "Tanner, I've lost everything. What more do you want from me? I know I hurt you, but I can't undo what's been done. Please, let's end this now. Tanner leaned forward, his gaze never leaving Colby's. You think you could just buy your way out of this? You think a piece of paper will fix the damage you've done? Colby swallowed hard, his voice shaking. What do you want, then? Tanner's lips curled into a thin smile. I don't want your money, Colby. I want you to disappear. I want you to vanish from my life, from Kendra's life. You don't deserve a second chance, and you never will. There was a long silence in the room, broken only by the sound of Colby's shallow breathing. The finality in Tanner's words hung in the air, and it was clear that this was the end for Colby. Tanner stood up, his voice cold as ice. This is over. He turned to leave, Colby's broken expression etched in his mind. As Tanner walked out of the conference room, he felt a strange sense of closure. He had won, but even so, something gnawed at him. Revenge hadn't brought him the peace he thought it would. Tanner's steps echoed in the empty hallway as he left the meeting. His heart was heavy, but his mind was clearer than ever. The battle was over, at least with Colby. He had won, but he wasn't sure what to feel about it anymore. The revenge had tasted sweet for a moment, but now it felt cold. He had done what he needed to do, but the void inside him was still there. He walked out of the building, the evening air crisp against his skin. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text from Kendra. She had been trying to reach him all day, but Tanner had ignored her calls. He had no desire to speak to her yet. The betrayal was still too fresh. But now, after everything had happened, he wasn't sure where they stood anymore. Tanner looked at the screen. Tanner, please, we need to talk. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting out a long breath. He didn't want to feel this way. He wanted to be angry, to hold on to that righteous fury. But with every passing hour, the anger was starting to fade, replaced by something more confusing, regret. He hesitated before typing a reply. We'll talk, but on my terms. As he hit send, the weight of the situation settled deeper into his chest. Kendra had made her choice, and now he was left to clean up the mess. The reckoning had only just begun. The conversation had to happen. Tanner knew that. Kendra had been calling him, texting him, leaving messages filled with desperation. But Tanner couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about them anymore. The truth had to come out, all of it. Every lie, every secret that had been buried between them had to be laid bare. When Kendra walked into the apartment, her eyes were tired. There were dark circles under them, evidence of the sleepless nights she had been enduring. She stood there for a moment, hesitating, as if unsure of what to say next. I never wanted to hurt you, she said softly, her voice shaky. I never meant for things to get this far. Tanner looked at her, his face unreadable. He wasn't sure what he felt anymore. Was it anger? Was it betrayal? Or was it something else? Something that was too complicated to even name? You think an apology is going to fix everything? Tanner asked, his voice firm, but there was a flicker of vulnerability underneath. You think I'll just forgive you, and we'll go back to what we had? Kendra's eyes filled with tears, and her voice cracked as she spoke. I am sorry, Tanner. I was lost. I didn't know what I was doing. Tanner shook his head, the anger bubbling up once more. You didn't know what you were doing? He stepped closer to her, his words sharp. You knew exactly what you were doing, Kendra. You made choices. You made promises to someone else. While I was here, trusting you. The truth hit harder than any of the lies. It wasn't just the affair. It was the betrayal of trust, of the life they had built together. Tanner had always believed in them, in their future. And now, all of that had been shattered. But Kendra wasn't giving up. She stepped forward, desperation in her eyes. I was scared, Tanner. Scared of losing myself. But this isn't who I am. This wasn't me. I was lost, and I thought I needed someone else to find my way. But now I see how wrong I was. Tanner took a step back, his chest tight. He could feel the weight of her words, but they didn't make it any easier. They didn't change the reality of what had happened. The damage was done, and nothing could erase it. The silence between them was deafening. The truth was out in the open now. But was it enough to rebuild? The next few days passed in a blur. Tanner found himself walking through the motions, but he wasn't fully present. Kendra had left him with a choice, to forgive or to walk away. She had pleaded for his forgiveness, but Tanner couldn't shake the feeling that no matter what he decided, nothing would ever be the same. The silence between them was suffocating. Every time they spoke, it felt like a negotiation, like they were both walking on eggshells. Kendra had apologized, but Tanner wasn't sure if he could believe her. Could he trust her again? Could they ever return to the life they once had? He couldn't stop thinking about the future, about how everything had changed in an instant. He couldn't go back. But could he move forward? Could he rebuild the trust that had been destroyed? One evening, after Kendra had left for the night, Tanner found himself alone in their living room, staring at the empty space around him. His thoughts swirled, and he could feel the weight of the decision pressing on him. The choice was his, but it wasn't a simple one. It never was. Forgiving her meant letting go of the anger, but would that mean letting go of his dignity too? Or would walking away mean losing everything he had ever worked for? He picked up his phone, staring at Kendra's last text. She was waiting for him. She was waiting for him to make the choice. But was he ready to make it? Tanner woke up to the sound of rain tapping against the window, the steady rhythm almost calming in its predictability. But inside, his mind was in chaos. The last few days had been a blur of emotions, doubt, anger, and a deep, gnawing emptiness. He had spent so many years building his life with Kendra, and now it was all crumbling apart, piece by piece. He wasn't sure how much more of this he could take. He had made his decision, but it felt like the weight of it was crushing him. He knew he had to walk away, that the marriage was beyond repair. But every part of him resisted. He didn't want to lose her, but at what cost? His pride? His peace of mind? He couldn't keep pretending that everything would go back to normal. He grabbed his phone from the nightstand, staring at the screen for a long moment before tapping a message. It was simple. "We need to talk." Kendra responded almost instantly. "I know. I'll be home soon." As he put the phone down, Tanner couldn't help but feel the familiar ache in his chest. This wasn't the way he had imagined things. There were no fairy tale endings, no grand gestures of forgiveness. This was the real world, and in the real world, sometimes people broke. The thought weighed heavy on him. He wanted to be strong, to walk away from the pain. But every time he thought he had made his choice, another part of him pulled him back. Kendra stepped into the house, the familiar scent of the place only serving to remind her of a life they once had. Everything had changed. The past few weeks felt like a lifetime, and she still didn't know where she stood with Tanner. She could feel the distance between them, the wall that had been built between them after the affair was exposed. She walked into the living room, finding Tanner sitting on the couch, his face unreadable. There was a tension in the air, thick, palpable, like something was about to break. He didn't look at her at first. He just stared straight ahead, his hands resting on his lap. "Kendra," he said finally, his voice low, "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to forgive you. I don't even know if I can." She took a deep breath, walking closer to him. She knew this was coming. She had expected it, but hearing the words still stung. "I know," she whispered. "I understand." They sat in silence for a long while. It was like neither of them knew what to say next. Kendra had apologized 1,000 times, but every time she tried, it felt like it wasn't enough. She wasn't sure if she could ever make Tanner see past her mistakes. "I've hurt you," she said quietly, "and I don't expect you to forgive me. But I need you to know that I never meant to cause this much pain." Tanner didn't respond immediately. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, Kendra saw something softer in them, a flicker of the man she once knew, the man who had stood by her through everything. "I don't know what happens next," Tanner said, his voice tinged with sadness. "But I can't keep pretending like everything is okay." Kendra nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I don't want you to pretend. I want you to make the decision that's right for you." Tanner stood up and walked to the window, his back to her. Kendra could see his shoulders tense as he looked out into the night. She knew he was struggling. She knew he wasn't ready to let go, but he also couldn't stay. Not after everything. "I need space," Tanner said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need to figure out what I want. I don't know if I can stay, Kendra. I don't know if I could trust you again." His words hit her like a physical blow. She knew he was right, that she had broken something that couldn't easily be fixed. But hearing him say it aloud, it shattered something inside of her. "Understand," she said softly, though the words tasted bitter on her tongue. "I'll give you the space you need." The days that followed were filled with a heavy silence. Tanner kept his distance, spending most of his time in his office or out of the house. Kendra stayed at home, trying to piece together the broken fragments of her life. It was a silence that neither of them wanted, but neither could escape. Tanner knew he had to make a decision. He couldn't keep living in this limbo. But every time he thought he was ready to make that choice, doubt crept in. Could he really walk away from Kendra? Could he forgive her? Every corner of the house reminded him of the life they had once shared. The laughter, the love, the comfort. It was all gone now, replaced by the lingering sting of betrayal. But as he sat in his office, staring out at the city below, he realized something. This wasn't just about forgiveness. It wasn't just about Kendra or Colby. It was about him. What did he need? What did he want for his future? The phone rang, snapping him from his thoughts. It was his lawyer again, reminding him that Colby's team was still trying to negotiate, trying to buy him out of the situation. But Tanner didn't care anymore. He didn't need money or settlements. What he needed was clarity. The silence in the house stretched on. But in that quiet, Tanner finally found a moment of clarity. He wasn't going to make a decision based on what others wanted. He was going to make it for himself. Tanner's mind was a battlefield, the constant tug of war between what was right and what felt like justice. The days had dragged on, the silence only broken by the occasional, strained conversation with Kendra. The more he tried to shut out the pain, the more it consumed him. He'd spent weeks plotting revenge, planning his next move, but now the lines were blurring. He sat alone in his office, staring at the file in front of him, the one that detailed Colby's complete downfall. The media had done its part. Now it was just a matter of finalizing the last steps. But every time he thought about it, every time he imagined Colby's life crumbling, Tanner felt something stirring inside him, something unexpected. A part of him didn't want to destroy Colby, not because he had forgiven him, but because he realized that revenge wasn't going to fix anything. Colby was already broken. The more Tanner focused on the past, the more he realized he was only hurting himself. Still, the anger wouldn't let go. It had settled into him like a disease, infecting his thoughts. He had spent so much time planning, so much effort into taking Colby down, that he had forgotten why he was doing it in the first place. Was it for justice? Or was it because it made him feel powerful? Tanner slammed the file closed and stood up. He couldn't sit still any longer. His mind was racing. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a sharp sound that echoed through the quiet house. He hesitated before walking to the door. When he opened it, Kendra stood there, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "I need to talk," she said softly, the vulnerability in her voice cutting through the tension in the air. Tanner's heart tightened. He wasn't sure if he was ready for this, but he nodded. "Come in." The weight of Kendra's presence was unbearable. She stepped inside, her footsteps almost echoing in the silence that filled the room. Tanner motioned for her to sit, but neither of them moved for a long moment. The tension was palpable, each of them fighting the urge to speak. Kendra finally broke the silence. "I don't know where to start," she whispered, her hands wringing in her lap. "I never wanted any of this. I never wanted to hurt you. I know I did. I know I've lost you." Tanner's jaw clenched. The words were familiar now, something he had heard countless times over the past few weeks, but it didn't make them any easier to hear. Kendra's regret was evident in her eyes, but he wasn't sure if it was enough. "You think an apology is enough?" he asked, his voice low. "You think saying you're sorry can fix everything?" Kendra's gaze dropped to the floor, and she shook her head. "I know it's not enough. I don't expect it to be, but I need you to know that I'm sorry, that I never meant for things to get this far. I never meant to lose you." Tanner felt a sharp pang in his chest. He had spent so much time focusing on the betrayal, on the pain that Kendra had caused, that he had forgotten something crucial. She was hurting too. She had lost herself in all of this, just as he had. "You've lost me, Kendra," Tanner said, his voice tight with emotion. "I can't keep going through this. I can't keep pretending like everything is okay." Tears welled up in Kendra's eyes, but she didn't speak. She just sat there, the weight of her choices crashing down on her. "I don't know if I can forgive you," Tanner said quietly, almost to himself. "But I also don't know if I can just walk away." The conversation had shifted. Tanner and Kendra were no longer fighting, no longer pushing each other away. The walls had started to come down, but there was still so much left unsaid. Tanner had expected anger, blame, accusations. But instead, he found himself feeling something else, something he couldn't quite put into words. "I've spent so much time hating you," Tanner admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been so focused on the revenge, on making sure you paid for what you did. But what does it matter now? Colby's life is ruined. I've done everything I set out to do, but I still feel empty." Kendra looked up at him, her face a mixture of confusion and sadness. "You think that destroying him will fix this? That it will fix us?" Tanner stood up, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know. I thought it would, but now all I see is a mess. I've ruined everything I've ever had. And for what? Because you thought it would make you feel better," Kendra said softly. "But revenge doesn't heal anything. It just keeps the pain going." Tanner looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in what felt like forever. Her eyes were filled with regret. Yes, but there was something else there too, something that had been missing in their relationship for a long time. "I don't know if I can go back to who we were," Tanner said, his voice barely a whisper. "But maybe we can find a way to move forward. I don't know what that looks like yet." Kendra nodded slowly, a small, hopeful smile tugging at her lips. "I don't know either, but maybe we can try." The shift in their relationship, subtle and quiet as it was, felt like a beginning. Not an end, but a possibility. A chance to rebuild not just the relationship, but the trust that had been broken. Tanner wasn't sure if he was ready to forgive her yet, but maybe, just maybe, he was ready to find a way forward. The night stretched on, but the silence between Tanner and Kendra was different now. It wasn't suffocating. It wasn't filled with anger or resentment. It was tentative, unsure, but it was also a fragile step toward something new. They hadn't figured everything out yet, but there was a chance that neither of them had been willing to acknowledge before. Tanner couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, the weight of everything pressing on his chest. His thoughts were scattered, flitting between his plan to ruin Colby's life and the soft, quiet moments he'd shared with Kendra in the past. It was hard to reconcile the man he'd been with the man he had become. The man who craved revenge, who let anger define his every decision. But now, in the quiet aftermath of everything, Tanner didn't know who he was anymore. He sat up, running a hand through his hair in frustration. Everything felt like a mess. His mind raced through everything. Colby, the affair, Kendra's apology, his own sense of pride and loss. It was easy to want revenge, to want to watch the person who hurt you suffer. But Tanner realized in that moment that he didn't want to be that person anymore. The thought unsettled him. He had spent so much time chasing vengeance, so much time making Colby pay for his mistakes. But what had it done for him? Had it fixed anything? No, it had only caused more pain, more destruction. As the sun began to rise, Tanner made a decision. He wouldn't continue this destructive path. He didn't know what came next, but he knew he needed to change. Kendra's footsteps broke his thoughts. She entered the room, her eyes tired but searching, waiting for him to speak. She could sense the shift in him, the change that had taken root. "I can't keep doing this," Tanner said, his voice raw. "I've been holding on to anger, Kendra, and it's only made me lose myself." Kendra moved closer, the air between them still tense, but with a hint of understanding. "I know," she whispered. "I've been trying to fix everything, trying to make it right. But I've learned that I can't change the past." Tanner nodded. "I can't change it either. But I think we need to find a way to move forward. I don't know how, but I'm willing to try." The next few days were a blur. Tanner and Kendra spent their time talking, really talking, about everything that had happened, about their pain, their regrets, and their broken trust. It wasn't easy. They both had so much to work through, so many things to untangle. But for the first time in weeks, it felt like they were moving in the right direction. Tanner found himself listening more than he spoke. He wanted to hear Kendra's side of things, to understand what had led her to make the choices she had. It wasn't about excusing her actions. It was about understanding them. Kendra, on the other hand, was vulnerable in ways she hadn't been before. She wasn't just apologizing. She was opening up, admitting to her mistakes, her fears, and the reasons why she had sought comfort elsewhere. It wasn't an excuse, but it was the first step toward healing. They spent hours in the living room, talking, crying, and sharing the weight of their shared pain. They were raw, exposed, but it felt like they were finally being real with each other. One night, after a long conversation, Kendra turned to him. "Do you think we can fix this?" she asked quietly, the vulnerability in her voice almost too much to bear. Tanner didn't answer right away. He looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, he saw the woman he had fallen in love with. The one who had made mistakes, yes, but the one who was willing to fight for what they had. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice soft, "but I'm willing to try. I don't want to give up on us." It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, moments where both of them wanted to give up. But they didn't. They kept going, kept talking, kept trying. Every day was a small step forward, even when it felt like they were stuck in the same place. But then, one afternoon, Kendra came to Tanner with something new. She had been holding on to a secret, one that she couldn't carry any longer. She had been carrying the burden of her betrayal for so long that it had become a weight she couldn't bear. "I have to tell you something," Kendra said, her voice shaking. "It's about Colby. There's something you don't know." Tanner looked up at her, his heart pounding. He had thought they had gone through everything, that there were no more secrets left. But there was. And the way Kendra was looking at him told him it was something big. "I didn't just betray you with Colby," Kendra continued, her eyes filled with regret. "Before all of this happened, I was pregnant, with his child." The words hit Tanner like a punch to the stomach. He couldn't breathe. His mind raced, but the words wouldn't come. He stared at her, unable to process what she was saying. "I didn't know what to do," Kendra said, tears spilling down her face. "I was scared. I thought about keeping it, but then I miscarried, and I never told you." Tanner stood up, his mind reeling. This was the last thing he had expected, but the more he thought about it, the more he realized that this moment, this truth, was the final piece of the puzzle. For a moment, the room felt like it was spinning. But then, slowly, Tanner walked over to her and pulled her into his arms. He didn't have all the answers, and he wasn't sure what came next. But in that moment, he understood something he hadn't before. They were both broken, but together, they could rebuild. "I don't know what's next for us," Tanner whispered, "but we're in this together, and that's all I need to know." Tanner sat alone in the living room, staring at the window as the rain poured down outside. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside him. He had thought he knew what he wanted: revenge, justice, retribution. But now, after everything that had happened, he was no longer sure. The lines had blurred. What did he really want? Was it peace? Or was it a chance to rebuild everything with Kendra? His thoughts swirled, and in the middle of it all, he realized something. He had been living in the past for too long. The hurt, the betrayal, Colby's interference, it all kept him stuck. But what if he could move forward? What if he could finally put everything behind him and decide what kind of man he wanted to be? The phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a text from Kendra. "Tanner, I know I can't change what I've done, but please, I need you to decide. I can't keep living like this." He stared at the message for a long moment, feeling the weight of her words. He had avoided this decision for so long, but now the time had come. He could stay in the past, filled with anger and resentment, or he could let go and try to build something new. Tanner took a deep breath and typed a response. "We need to talk. Let's figure this out." He hit send, feeling a small sense of relief. The choice had been made. There was no more running. He was ready to face whatever came next. Kendra sat nervously at the kitchen table, her hands clasped together tightly in front of her. The air was thick with anticipation. Tanner had agreed to meet her, to talk, and now the moment was finally here. She had no idea what he was going to say or what he had decided, but she knew that this was the turning point. They could either begin to rebuild together, or they could part ways, each going their separate paths. The door opened, and Tanner walked in, his eyes meeting hers. He had a calmness about him now, a resolution that had been absent for so long. He didn't look angry anymore. He didn't look like the man she had betrayed. "Tanner," Kendra said softly, her voice trembling. "I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm ready for whatever you decide." Tanner sat down across from her, studying her face for a moment before speaking. "I've been thinking a lot," he began, his voice steady. "And I've realized that I've been holding on to anger for too long. I've been so focused on revenge, so focused on making you feel the way I felt, that I lost sight of what's important." Kendra's heart beat faster, the uncertainty still lingering. "And what's important to you now?" Tanner's eyes softened. "What's important is moving forward. I can't change the past, and neither can you. But we have the chance to decide what happens next. I've been punishing you for something you've already paid for. And I've been punishing myself, too. But I don't want to keep living in the past. I want to move on. I want to see if we can rebuild this, if we can rebuild us." Kendra's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected this. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was something else, a chance. "I'm willing to try," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. "But I understand if you need more time." Tanner shook his head, his voice filled with a quiet determination. "No, I've made my decision. I'm ready to try." And in that moment, Kendra knew that while their journey wasn't over, they had taken the first step toward healing. It wouldn't be easy, but they were finally facing each other honestly. And that was enough. The days that followed were filled with slow, careful progress. Tanner and Kendra began to rebuild piece by piece. It wasn't easy. It wasn't smooth. There were moments of tension, moments of doubt. But there were also moments of honesty, of vulnerability, of connection that hadn't been there in years. Tanner found himself sitting down with Kendra more often now, not to argue or fight, but to talk, to understand each other. They talked about the past, but more importantly, they talked about the future. They talked about what they wanted out of life and out of each other. For the first time, they were communicating, truly communicating, about what it meant to move forward. One evening, after dinner, Kendra leaned across the table, her eyes searching Tanner's face. "Do you think we can really make this work?" she asked, her voice quiet but filled with hope. Tanner reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "I don't know what the future holds, but I do know one thing. I'm not giving up on us. Not yet." Kendra squeezed his hand, her heart swelling with emotion. "Neither am I. There was still so much to repair, so much to figure out." But for the first time in a long while, Tanner felt like they could do it. Together, as they sat in silence, hands intertwined, Tanner realized that the final step wasn't about getting revenge or punishing anyone. The final step was about finding forgiveness for Kendra, for Colby, and for himself. And while the road ahead would be difficult, for the first time, he felt ready to walk it. Days turned into weeks, and while the silence between Tanner and Kendra had eased, it hadn't entirely dissipated. There were still moments where the weight of everything would hit them both at once. But they were learning to live with it, learning how to breathe in each other's presence without the constant tension that had plagued them for so long. Tanner had thrown himself into work, finding some relief in the daily grind. The business side of his life was predictable, structured, and it gave him a sense of control that he hadn't felt in a long time. But even there, in the office, a part of him could still hear the echoes of everything that had happened. His thoughts always drifted back to Kendra, to the life they had once shared, to the betrayal that had shattered it. One evening, as Tanner sat alone in his office, he received an unexpected call. It was from Colby's lawyer. "Mr. Rhodes, I'm calling to let you know that Colby is seeking a settlement. He's asking for you to release the public statements and retract some of the claims." Tanner's grip on the phone tightened. Colby had fallen from grace, but he still had the gall to try to make deals. The nerve of the man to think that money could fix anything now. "Tell Colby," Tanner said, his voice cold, "that he has nothing left. I don't want his money. I don't want anything from him. He's done." The lawyer on the other end paused before speaking again. "Understood. But be warned, Mr. Rhodes. Colby's desperation might lead him to try something more drastic." Tanner felt a chill run through him. Desperation was dangerous, and Colby was not someone to underestimate. But Tanner wasn't afraid. The game was over for Colby. He just didn't know it yet. Colby's desperation took a new form the very next day. The media outlets exploded with rumors about Tanner's business dealings, mysterious accounts, and whispered allegations of his own financial missteps. Someone had leaked information. Tanner's world, the one he had worked so hard to build, was beginning to unravel. The calm, controlled environment he had fought to maintain was now threatened by an unseen hand. Kendra was the one who first pointed it out, showing Tanner an online post that claimed to have insider knowledge about his business. The rumors were wild, exaggerated, and outright fabricated, but the damage was done. The seed had been planted, and it would only take a few more whispers to make the whole story explode. Tanner's first instinct was to retaliate, to fight back, to go after Colby with everything he had left. But as he paced the living room, his eyes filled with fire, he stopped. For the first time in weeks, the desire for revenge, the need to strike back, felt pointless. Colby was already defeated. What did he have left to take from him? What would more revenge bring, other than more pain, more destruction? Kendra watched him, sensing the shift in his demeanor. She stood by the doorway, waiting for him to speak. "Tanner," she said softly, "what are you thinking?" Tanner met her gaze, a slight heaviness in his eyes. "I'm thinking I've had enough of this game." Tanner's decision had been made. It wasn't about Colby anymore. It wasn't about fighting the lies or seeking vengeance. It was about moving on, reclaiming his life, and finding peace, no matter the cost. He had spent so much time consumed by anger, by betrayal, that he had lost sight of what really mattered. Kendra was still here. She had made mistakes, yes, but so had he. They both had their demons to face, and together, maybe they could rebuild. But first, he needed to take control of the situation. He had to clear his name, not for Colby, not for anyone else, but for himself. Tanner had worked too hard to build his business, to lose everything over lies. The next morning, he gathered his team and laid out a plan. They would work with the legal team to clear his name. They would fight the false rumors, take back the narrative, and expose the truth behind Colby's scheme. Later that day, he sat down with Kendra and laid out his plan. He explained his decision to step away from the fight for vengeance, focusing instead on his future and theirs. "I'm done with the games, Kendra," he said, looking at her with a quiet resolve. "I'm taking control of my life again." She nodded, her eyes filled with relief and understanding. "I'm with you, Tanner. I know it won't be easy, but I'll fight for us. Together." The moment wasn't perfect, but it was real. There was still a long road ahead. But Tanner felt something shift inside him, a weight lifting, a clarity he hadn't had in a long time. They were finally facing forward together. And that was enough for now. Tanner stood by the window, staring out at the city skyline as the early morning light bathed the streets in a soft golden glow. The calmness of the moment was almost surreal, like the world outside was unaware of the chaos that had consumed his life for so long. He had decided to put an end to the turmoil, to stop letting the past dictate his every move. But even as he moved forward, there were still remnants of the storm that lingered in his heart. He could feel the weight of the decisions he had made, the ones that had led him to this point. Kendra walked into the room, her footsteps light, and approached him slowly. There was something about the way she stood next to him now, no longer a stranger, but someone he was learning to understand again. "You're quiet today," Kendra said softly, her voice gentle. Tanner glanced at her and gave a small, weary smile. "Just thinking." She tilted her head. "About what?" He sighed, his gaze returning to the window. "About what happens next. We've come a long way, but we're not done yet. I know that. I don't know if we'll ever be completely done, but I do know this." He turned to face her, his eyes serious but calm. "I'm ready to try. For real. No more running." Kendra smiled, the soft curve of her lips a quiet affirmation of the hope that was growing between them. "We're in this together," she said quietly. "We don't have to have all the answers right now. We just have to keep moving forward." Tanner nodded, his chest tightening with a mixture of relief and uncertainty. The road ahead was still uncharted, but at least they were walking it side by side. And that, for now, was enough. With the decision made to fight for their future, Tanner and Kendra began to focus on the practical steps needed to reclaim their lives. It wasn't just about moving forward emotionally. It was about fixing what had been broken, both in their relationship and in Tanner's business. Tanner had already taken steps to clear his name, but now the real work began. The false rumors and media frenzy that Colby had stirred up were far from over, and Tanner knew it wouldn't be easy to undo the damage. But he wasn't backing down. He had spent too long letting others control the narrative. It was time to take back the power. He met with his legal team, laid out a strategy, and began working with a crisis management team to counter the false claims. This wasn't just about winning. It was about proving to himself that he could take control of his life again, that the mistakes of the past wouldn't define him. Kendra, too, stepped in to help. She began reaching out to her own network, connecting with key people who could offer support. The two of them were no longer just a married couple trying to fix what was broken. They were a team again, facing the world together. One evening, after a long day of meetings and planning, Tanner sat down with Kendra in the living room. The weight of the day had settled heavily on his shoulders, but there was a quiet peace in the air. "We've got a long way to go," Tanner said, his voice tired but resolute. "But we're doing it. We're moving forward." Kendra nodded, resting her hand on his. "And we'll keep moving, no matter how hard it gets." Tanner smiled, his eyes meeting hers. For the first time in what felt like forever, he felt a spark of hope. They were facing the future together, and that was all that mattered. The turning point came unexpectedly when Tanner's legal team finally found a way to expose the full truth about Colby. The lies that Colby had fed to the media were unraveled, piece by piece, as the evidence against him became irrefutable. The public's perception of Colby had shifted dramatically. His credibility was destroyed, and the damage was irreversible. But it wasn't the public exposure of Colby that made Tanner feel like he had won. It was the realization that he no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. He didn't need revenge. He didn't need to be vindicated in the eyes of others. The battle had never really been about Colby. It had been about Tanner regaining control of his own life. As the final pieces of the legal battle fell into place, Tanner found himself standing at a crossroads. The path behind him was filled with anger, betrayal, and regret. But the path ahead was still uncertain. Full of hope, yes, but also doubt. He didn't know what the future would hold, but he was ready to face it. Kendra sat beside him, her hand resting on his arm. "What now?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. Tanner turned to her, meeting her gaze with a quiet resolve. "Now we rebuild. We start over, together." Kendra smiled, her eyes filled with understanding. Together. For the first time, Tanner felt like the weight of everything had lifted, if only just a little. He had chosen a path of healing. And while it wasn't easy, it was the only one that truly mattered. Tanner stood in the corner of his office, his gaze fixed on the screen in front of him. The final settlement had been signed, and Colby's name was officially removed from the equation. The legal documents were stacked neatly on his desk, confirming that the media frenzy would finally die down. Colby was out of the picture, but Tanner knew that clearing the past wasn't as simple as making a few phone calls. He had gotten what he wanted, the retribution he had once craved. But as he looked at the documents, a new sense of unease settled in. What now? What did he do once the battle was over? He glanced at the clock. Kendra was due to return from her meeting with the crisis management team soon. Tanner had come to realize that all the business deals, all the paperwork in the world couldn't fill the space that Kendra had once occupied. And right now, more than anything, he wanted her by his side. Tanner's phone buzzed with a message. It was from Kendra. "We're done for the day. I'm on my way home. I'll be there in 10. The simple message made his chest tighten. He wasn't ready to pretend that everything was fine. Not yet. They still had things to work through, but they had come so far. Tanner felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude that they were still here, still fighting for something. He took a deep breath and picked up the papers from the desk, placing them in a drawer. Closing it gently, he made his way to the living room, ready to face whatever came next with Kendra. Kendra walked through the door, her tired eyes betraying the exhaustion of another long day. She had been working relentlessly to support Tanner through everything, But it wasn't just the external battles they were fighting anymore. It was the internal struggle, the rebuilding of trust, the mending of a relationship that had been torn apart. She looked at Tanner, sitting on the couch, the familiar tension between them still lingering. They had made progress, yes, but the road ahead was long. The journey of repairing what had been broken wasn't going to be smooth, and they both knew it. "Hey," she said softly, setting her bag down and joining him on the couch. "Hey," Tanner replied, his voice gentle. He could see the exhaustion in her face, the weight of everything they had both been carrying. "How was the meeting?" Kendra leaned back against the couch, rubbing her temples. "Tough, but I think we cleared up some things. The media is finally starting to back off. Colby's been buried, legally and publicly. But, I don't know, I still feel like we're not done." Tanner reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "We're not done," he said, "but we're making progress. We've come a long way, and we've faced things we never thought we'd have to. But we're still here." Kendra met his eyes, and for the first time in a long time, she saw something familiar in his gaze. Hope. "I don't want to lose you, Tanner," she said quietly. "I know I messed up, and I know I hurt you, but I'm trying. I swear I am." Tanner held her gaze for a long moment. "I know, Kendra. I'm trying too. It's not easy. I can't just forget what happened. But I'm here. I'm not giving up on us." They sat in silence for a while, the weight of their conversation lingering in the air. It wasn't easy to rebuild trust after everything, but they were both ready to try. And that, for now, was enough. As the days passed, Tanner and Kendra worked together to rebuild their life. But there was still one thing left to face: the test. The real test, where they would both have to decide if they were truly ready to move forward or if the past would haunt them forever. It came unexpectedly. One afternoon, as Tanner was leaving his office, a familiar name flashed across his phone screen: Colby Vance. His heart skipped a beat, but he quickly composed himself and answered the call. "Tanner," Colby's voice came through, cold and sharp. "You've won. But you're not done. There's still a way to destroy everything you've built. You can't stop me. Not now, not ever." Tanner's grip tightened around the phone. The nerve of Colby to call, to threaten him even after everything that had happened. He had no intention of engaging with him again, but the anger surged inside him once more. He had already destroyed Colby's career, and now he was being taunted by him. "I'm done with you, Colby," Tanner said, his voice icy. "You don't have the power anymore. I'll make you regret this," Colby hissed before hanging up. Tanner stood there for a moment, staring at the phone in his hand. The anger that had once felt so justifiable now seemed misplaced. He didn't need to keep fighting. He didn't need Colby to ruin him. Colby had already ruined himself. But the phone call had stirred something inside Tanner. His instinct was to lash out, to retaliate. Yet, he knew now that this was not the path he needed to walk. He was done with the cycle of revenge, done with letting Colby dictate his emotions. He dialed Kendra's number, needing her presence, needing her steady voice. "Kendra," he said when she picked up, "I need you to remind me of what really matters." Kendra's voice came through soft and calm. "You, Tanner, we've been through so much, and we've come so far. The past doesn't define us anymore. We do." Tanner's heart slowed, and the anger that had flared inside him dissipated. He was done with Colby. He was done with the past. It was time to fully embrace the future, with Kendra, with his own healing, and with a renewed sense of peace. The storm had finally passed. Tanner stood on the balcony of his apartment, looking out over the city as the sun set behind the skyline. The orange and pink hues spread across the sky, painting the world in a soft, peaceful glow. It felt like the world was breathing again, free from the tension and pain that had weighed him down for so long. He had made his decision. No more revenge. No more living in the shadows of the past. He had chosen to move forward. He had chosen Kendra, and that choice was starting to feel right. Kendra joined him outside, standing beside him, her hand slipping into his. The two of them stood there in silence, watching the world go by. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy, but it was theirs. They had fought for this moment, and they were finally seeing the fruits of their labor. "We did it," Kendra said softly, her voice almost a whisper in the cool evening air. Tanner smiled, his gaze softening as he looked at her. Yeah, we did. He pulled her closer, the weight of everything that had happened lifting off his shoulders. They had come through the fire, and now they were ready for whatever came next. Together. We don't know what tomorrow holds, Tanner said, his voice steady. But we're in this together. And that's all I need. Kendra rested her head on his shoulder, her heart lighter than it had been in months. Together, she echoed the word of promise. As the sky darkened and the first stars began to twinkle above them, Tanner realized that the greatest victory wasn't in the revenge or the justice. It was in the choice to heal, to forgive, and to love again. And that was enough. And that's where our story comes to a close, a journey filled with betrayal, heartache, and finally, healing. But before we end, I want to hear from you. What do you think of Tanner and Kendra's journey? Was revenge truly the answer, or was forgiveness the key to moving forward? If you've enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear this, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for more emotional journeys like this one. And of course, if you're feeling curious about what's next, click the bell icon so you never miss an update. Now, it's your turn. What would you have done if you were in Tanner's shoes? Would you have chosen revenge or forgiveness? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Your opinions matter, and we love reading them.